Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We welcome you here today as people join the call. Welcome you here today, and we would like to, maybe we'll go over a few housekeeping points first as people begin to join. I see that the numbers were still increasing a little bit. So maybe we can go to the next slide, Parnika. So for French or Spanish listening, please turn on the interpretation feature at the bottom of your screen and then click French or Spanish in the pop-up menu. And then if you have questions for the speakers, please use the question and answer section for that. And please do share your ideas and feedback in the chat so that we keep the questions for the panelists in the Q&A section. Okay, the numbers are still going up, but I think I will just go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Progress Towards the Global Nutrition Targets, Achievements of the 2021 Tokyo Nutrition for Growth and Year of Action Commitments. Can you go to the next slide, please, Parnika? Okay, so I am Carrie Hubble-Melgarejo. I am the Program Director for Global Nutrition Report. And on the dais today, we have a couple of special speakers. Just looking to see, we've got one that we're trying to see if has joined, and I'm not seeing it yet. So we may be joined by an additional special guest by Brooke Pont, the Special Envoy for Nutrition and the Secretary General of the Nutrition for Growth Summit. And excellent, thank you. So Brooke is here. We also have Sonia Anselin Panzani, who's the head of country action at the Scaling Up Nutrition movement at the Sun Movement. So thank you also for being our special guest today, Sonia. And thank you also to your team for helping us with the tech check and with offering us your hosting panel. Also, we will hear today from Dr. Shivani Ghosh and Dr. Giacomo Zanello, who are the co-chairs of the Independent Expert Group of the Global Nutrition Report. Shivani is also Research Associate Professor at the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy at Tufts University. And Giacomo is also Professor in Food Economics and Health and Head of the Agri-Food Economics and Marketing Department of the University of Reading. So the objectives of our webinar today are to share findings from our report, the progress toward the global nutrition targets, achievements of the 2021 Tokyo Nutrition for Growth and Year of Action Commitments. We want to equip stakeholders with insights to develop strong, clear commitments to improve policy, programs, and outcomes for nutrition. And we want to foster collaboration and accountability by sharing the report and highlighting that you can find in the Nutrition Accountability Framework Tracker the assessments of progress on each commitment goal that you may be following. I would like now to introduce our special guests who will make opening and framing remarks. For those who joined late, I'm now saying again that we are hearing from Brooke Pont, who's the French Special Envoy for Nutrition and Secretary General of the Nutrition for Growth Summit, and a wonderful nutrition champion. We're hearing from Sonia Anselin Panzani, who's the head of country action at the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, and also a wonderful champion with countries to support their work on nutrition around the globe. So I'd like to start with Brooke. Brooke, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from sunny Paris. Very happy to be with you today. Thank you for the opportunity to open this webinar almost 2 months after we reached the summit and for peak N4G. While in a very uncertain international context, N4G Paris was a major success, I believe, with 160 commitment makers across 75 countries, registering 517 new commitments as of the latest deadline of April 11th. So that includes $29.5 billion in new financial commitments, but we are looking forward possible new commitments before the deadline of June 30. The commitments were made from a variety of stakeholders, from state actors to the civil society, philanthropies, and of course, development banks. While the financial success is, of course, a huge achievement, I don't think we should forget the political commitments. And these are also essential and pave the way to create a paradigm shift in nutrition. Because we believe that nations must take the matter in their own hands, and wealth needs to be redistributed to produce more wealth. It is also important to note, I believe, that low income and lower middle income countries represent 57% of donors, while middle income countries represent 14% and high income countries 29%. N4G Paris was inclusive and put all states around the table. I believe the figure is 115 delegations of different governments that were present at the summit. Commitments are spread across all of 6 N4G thematics, ensuring a multi-dimensional approach to nutrition. One of our objectives was to not focus only on international commitments, but also domestic, as nutrition touches every country in the world. At N4G Paris, 71% of commitments were targeted for national use and 28% for global or supranational use. We're excited that our mobilization work led to so many commitments coming in, and we are very encouraged that commitment makers are using the nutrition accountability framework to actually register those commitments for tracking. In fact, the process of commitment making set out for Paris integrated the GNR's nutrition accountability framework from the start, and the foundation for doing this was laid out prior to the N4G summit in Tokyo. So I believe the nutrition accountability framework is really a pillar of our of our cause, of our mission. Using the NAF allows us to assess the smartness of the commitments and provide a robust metric for tracking progress. Of course, all of this has been possible due to the call for action from our global community for the accountability frameworks that allow us to self-monitor our commitments. And the report Shibani and Giacomo are here to tell us about says that indeed the majority of commitments reported on from Tokyo could be assessed for their progress. And it shows the majority of those which could be assessed actually reached their targets or were on course to do so. So this is an important finding that further underscores the importance of using robust frameworks like the NAF tracker for commitments made for the N4G summits. And lastly, I would like to thank again the GNR for its essential contribution to N4G, absolutely crucial. Gathering an unprecedented amount of financial commitment is one thing, but we are now faced with an even bigger challenge, which is accountability, and the GNR will continue having a key role in ensuring this. Carrie, thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruce. We really appreciate your support and the collaboration, and glad that we have such a big champion now for nutrition as you. Congratulations on your recent award.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. um, Thank you so much. Sonia, over to you. And someone had made a suggestion in the chat that maybe we should try to pin her video instead of, let's see if we can do that. Sonia, over to you.
Hi, Carrie, and hi, everyone, and warm greetings from very rainy Geneva. Very happy to be here with you. So just to say that this time last year, commitment makers had just started reporting on their achievements since the Tokyo summit, but the work had begun a long time before. At the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, we had benefited from EU-funded support through the EU for Sun project, namely through Expertise France, the Spanish cooperation FIAP, as well as C4N, amongst others, to help the Sun country governments review, assess their progresses against their Tokyo commitments in preparation for formally reporting into the Nutrition Accountability Framework, and also, of course, as a meaningful step to prepare and engage in the Paris N4G Summit, being able to develop their new commitments based on this essential review and learning. Given that governments had over half of the commitment goals from Tokyo, the work to support country governments in their reporting was critical. But we also know that their peers at the civil society level, private sector, as well as donor, multilateral, and academic institutions were also working to do the same thing. And here I would like to acknowledge the important contribution to this enhanced increased accountability from civil society network with namely their campaign, We Are All Accountable. And I think that all this work paid dividends. From commitment makers' participation, we were able to learn a lot, which we shared during the different webinars and workshops that we organized in support of the Sun countries' mobilization, and which substantially helped the 50 Sun countries which made their commitments to date. And also moving forward will help those that are still working to make their new N4G commitments and to register them in the NAF by the June deadline. Also those who will be receiving clarifying questions from the GNR on their commitments already made, and investors interested in accountability for progress on nutrition. So very happy that all together we keep this momentum going through enhanced reporting as well, and operationalize the commitments, obviously. Thank you so much, and over to you, Carrie.
Thank you so much, Sonia. We appreciate your support and encouragement of everyone in the process. So I think next we go to Shibani to speak a little bit about why nutrition accountability is so important.
Thank you,
Shibani,
Carrie. And can you hear me, Carrie?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Great. Thank you and welcome, everyone. It's so exciting to see all of you from all over the world. And I think one of the things when I started working with the Global Nutrition Report on the independent expert group, it was an experience to learn about the importance of accountability and how do you measure accountability. That was the sort of the task that the IG was given when we started this process a few years ago. And the question really is why? Why do we need it? You know, we really need to understand that for us to be able to improve global nutrition, we need to be able to track it. We need to be able to take those commitments that we are making and translate them into real world actions and results. And we need to understand what has worked and what has not. And I think that second part is sort of the measuring of what has worked and what has not worked. And the process of undertaking that achievement of the commitment is very important. And that, in essence, is why accountability is so important. And in essence, the way I see this is that it's not the end result, but it's also the process that we undertake and the progress that we make, which provides us lessons learned that can be utilized in future actions. It can be utilized by other commitment makers. This will be very apparent when you see the results that we are about to present today. So if you can move to the next slide, please. one of the things I want to highlight is that the accountability assessments are meant to help our community monitor and self-evaluate and ensure that any actions that we make, whether we are governments, donors, civil society organizations, multilaterals, academic or research institutions, and or private sector, that we are able to achieve the commitments that we have made for. And the NAF allows us to take a very, very robust approach towards this. The commitments being made in the NAF allow us to assess them for specificity, measurability, achievability, relevance, and timeliness. In short, smartness. And having worked on the previous rounds of commitments, I can tell you that what we are noticing with the NAF tracker is that it's an extremely robust tool. But a key point to highlight here, this robust tool can only be successful if we have a lot of support, which is what in the process of the Tokyo and the French, the Paris commitments, we have received substantially. It's an intensive process, the tracking and the processing of the commitments. And I can say, having been part of both the Tokyo and the Paris commitment making process, that it is not at all possible without partnering and coordinating with key stakeholder groups across the community. Obviously, the Sun movement, the host governments, both Japan and France, have been very, very critical stakeholders in allowing us and working with us in taking the NAF as a tool and integrating it into the principles of engagement and into the commitment making guides. We were also supported heavily by UN agencies and civil society across the globe for both the 2021 and the 2025 commitments. While we can't obviously go through the process of how commitments are made, Carrie will review the process of tracking that we undertook for the 2021 commitments, which will really highlight the complexity of the process. With that, I will hand this over to her.
Okay. So the commitment tracking process, just to say that this was the GNR's first major activity since moving to a new host. So amidst this activity, we were also fundraising, thinking about enhancements, for example, clarifying dimensions of equity, which you'll hear more about from Shivani a little bit later. And the general approach was largely to do things as they had been done before. But there was a catch. There was a wrinkle. This was the first time that progress was being assessed on these commitments in a structured database, the Nutrition Accountability Framework, or the NAF, that you've been hearing us talk about. So for our first few months of funding, we set up the approach to do this. Then in April of 2024, we sent a save the date. And that was meant to allow us to tidy up the NAF users' contact information before sending them the information to report. This was important. There's a link shared earlier in the chat. There's a link about the role of everyone in tracking progress. And you'll note that there's a lot of turnover at organizations, and there's a need to sort of make sure that whoever is meant to be reporting in on their progress is aware of that and is up to date with what has been going on with the commitment. So we sent that save the date. We did some cleanup of contacts. We sent the invitation to report. The reporting window was then open from April to early August. And during this time, we used the availability of different resources, a video guide, a webinar, the assessment methodology as opportunities and reminders to report. We also extended the deadline twice. Friends at Sun, EU4Sun, the N4G outreach group, and others in the community supported follow-up with commitment makers to encourage reporting. And then even commitment makers got involved in mobilizing progress reports. One of our stakeholder group co-chairs posted on social media about their organization having submitted all their reports. And we then leveraged that idea and began giving commitment makers a social media post that they could use if they wanted to celebrate having finished reporting in their progress. Meanwhile, we followed up with commitment makers for clarification so that we could actually assess their progress according to the methodology. And we assessed those that we could, ultimately sharing results with individual commitment makers to give them an opportunity for further clarification. And those who had not responded were also notified that those results would be posted so that they were aware that it would say that they hadn't responded. And then in terms of our assessment methodology, of those we reached out to for reports, a group of those did report in. And of those reports, some of the goals were not able to be assessed. Those that were assessed were assigned key statuses. The main statuses were not reached, off course or no progress, on course in progress, or reached. And then as we analyzed the results, we looked for themes and learnings that could help those making commitments for N4G. We came up with our initial conclusions and began sharing those with Sun Hubs and those they support and with other stakeholder groups to sort of ground test those ideas. And then the summary report of our findings is now posted online, and the individual reports of progress are posted to the NAF, along with a downloadable data set for those who wish to conduct further analysis on the commitments that they follow. Now I will turn over to Giacomo and Shivani to share our findings from this process.
Thank you very much, Carrie. So what I would like to do in the next few slides is providing some insight about the trends and the patterns that we are looking into the data. We will split these findings in 6 different sections. But before going into that, let me give a little bit an overview of the overall response rate. So in the next slide, we are seeing the response rate. So how many commitment makers and how many commitment goals were reported in. So just as a reminder, we are talking about 2021 Tokyo commitments. So those are not the Paris commitment, but the 2021 commitments. So at that time, 202 commitment makers submitted over 900 goals. During the progress tracking, 111 commitment makers reported on 476 goals. So more than half of the total goals were reported. Out of those 476, we assess a positive progress for 222 goals. We will provide more information about those very soon. But this is the overall picture about the response rate. The first of the 6 themes that we wanted to share is looking at who is reporting, who are the stakeholders that are reporting progress, and which kind of goals those commitments are. What we observe some interesting patterns. The first pattern is about smartness, and we clearly see how smarter commitment goals are more likely to have been reported on. So this infographic shows the 4 different levels of smartness, so from high to low, and for each of those level of smartness, the darker orange bar shows the proportion of those different level of smartness of goals that have been submitted based on the different level of smartness. We clearly see how more than half, 60% of commitment goals that have a high smartness have been reported on. And for the other levels of smartness, so upper moderate, lower moderate, and low, the proportion of commitment goals that have been submitted for the progress has been much lower. We are not showing here, but also the verification process matter. Verification process is the process that GNR is undertaking to support commitment makers. So after commitment are submitted, the GNR is engaged with the commitment maker to make sure that the information provided are internally consistent. So what we observe is we observe that the commitment goals that have a high level of smartness and have completed the verification process have been more likely to have their commitment goal, the progress of their commitment goal submitted. Which somehow highlight the importance of supporting commitment makers throughout the process. The following slide, we see how the location from the commitment makers matter. In here, we divided the different goal by the location of the commitment maker from low income level country to lower middle income country and upper middle income country up to high income country. And we see how a greater proportion of commitment makers from high income country submitted a report on the commitment goal compared to the other categories. We can go into the nature of the commitment maker and see whether we observe any trends. This infographic shows how the proportion of the different key commitment makers, so we have government, civil society, private sector, donor, multilateral, and academic or research institution, we see the proportion of commitment that have been submitted the progress across all those different commitment makers. And we see how academic, private sector, and donor organization have higher rates than governments in terms of submitting their progress. Academic with 80%, private sector with 78%, and donor organization with 70%, and the government with 37%. We will try to look into what that means in the following slides. We can look also at the nature of the commitment. The nutrition accountability framework classify the nutrition action in 3 different type: enabling goals, policy goals, and impact goals. And we see with a similar infographic that what we have seen in the previous slide, how commitment goals related to enabling and policy action have higher reporting rates than impact goal. And somehow this might indicate how impact goals required a greater insight into the timeline to achieve those. And the planning and the accounting for this time lag is important for being able to submit their progress. Let's look a little bit about how the progress was assessed and the level of achievement. I mentioned earlier that around half, a little bit more than half of the all commitment goals that were originally submitted, they were submitted a progress. Out of those, nearly 2/3 of the commitment that were able to be assessed were assessed as reach or on track to meet their target. However, 34% were off course and 3% were not reached. It's important to highlight how not all the commitment, not all the progress that were submitted was able to be assessed. The reason could be that there were not enough information in the information that were shared that help to assess the progress. The GNR has done a significant amount of work trying to engage throughout the process with the commitment makers. And for many of those who were able to kind of clarify some doubt. Still, 124 commitment goals were not able to be assessed. Let's look a little bit more about who are where the goals that have been assessed as a positive progress came from. With a similar infographic of what we have seen earlier, we see that high income country and lower middle income countries commitment makers had a higher proportion of goals with a positive progress compared to low income countries. Around 67% from high income countries versus 40%, a little bit more than 40% for low income countries. We can also see how it is related with the nature of the commitment goals. And as we can see in the following slide, we are reporting, if it's possible to move to the following slide, we can see how the different nutrition action classification relate with the different outcome of the progress. So from reach target to on course, off course and not reach, and could not be assessed. And what we can see is that the proportion of enabling goals that show the highest positive progress. And again, the impact goal, because of their nature, they somehow lag behind with the majority of them, which are of course. We can look at how it is related with the different stakeholders as well. Again, we have the same set of stakeholders from government, civil society, private sector, donor, multilateral, and academic or research. And we can see how donors and civil society organizations show the highest share of goals with a positive progress. We can relate the information also with the smartness. So how smart is related with having a positive progress. So having achieved the target or being on track, on course to achieving the target. Commitment goals with the high smartness or full verification were indeed more likely to achieve or remain on course toward their target. We are seeing also how lower moderate have a quite high proportion of those. And the one with low smartness, around 50% of those were on course or with a positive positive progress. Quite importantly, one of the reasons why the commitment were not able to be assessed is to what extent the indicator that it was provided were assessed or not. So whether they were able to capture the data that they were required to assess their commitment. And we see a clear distinct in the location of the stakeholder. There is a clear divide between commitment makers that are from lower middle income countries, upper middle income countries, and high income countries, versus commitment makers that are from low income countries, which suggest they might face greater challenges in assessing and measure the indicator for to assess the progress of the commitment goal. We can see this very clearly also on the nature of the commitment, and we see how the commitment that were the least likely to have their indicator assessed are the impact focus goals. Impact focus goals are also commitment that possibly require a greater engagement in terms of collecting the data, and this might suggest how identify the data needs in the process of planning the commitment is critical for commitment makers. These require accounting for the resources needed, including the investment in data collection, and or access the extent in which we can access and use existing data. So those are an initial snapshot of the trends that we see in the data. And I would like to pass the floor to Shibani Ghosh to expand on the other three different themes that we see.
Thank you, Giacomo. And I think one of the key areas that, in addition to what Giacomo has already explored, we wanted to understand what would be the barriers and opportunities for achieving progress. And we have some interesting results here, as you can see in this slide. Over a quarter of the goals that were reported were severely or highly impacted by specific barriers. And most of these were around political instability, conflicts, or epidemics like the COVID pandemic. The COVID pandemic was something that we had identified as a critical issue, obviously, in an earlier iteration of our report, our thematic report. What you can see from this figure is that the governments were affected the most. So about 41% of the goals that were reported on in this progress assessment indicated that they had been severely or highly impacted by one of these three issues. If we can go to the next slide, please. This slide is again laid out the same way from the previous section, on where we were looking at how goals were affected by the economic status of the country that the goals targeted on. And what you can see on the left side is that 55% of the goals that were targeting or were from low income countries were affected by the barriers that we have outlined. And the percentages, as you can see, for lower middle income countries, upper middle income countries, and high income countries are much, much lower. And if you go to the next slide, what we can look at is what were the types of barriers. We kind of talked very broadly around political instability and conflicts. But what we were able to identify, thanks to the really intensive reporting from our commitment makers, was the type of barriers. And what you see in this slide are a significant proportion indicated in ability to secure or establish funding. Several indicated rising costs, decreased availability of skilled personnel, shifting priorities. These were really the biggest top barriers that were identified. And what is very interesting is this does differ by the type of commitment maker or stakeholder. So for example, governments and civil society especially noted resource challenges, while private sector and multilaterals cited increased costs or change in priorities as major impacts. And what this has really highlighted to us from the perspective of the NAF and the GNR is that for successful reporting of making of commitment and reporting of those commitments, it would be really important to identify those barriers during the planning phase of the commitment making, and also to develop mitigation plans to address any shocks. And I think from a global community perspective, it would be important for us to understand how different types of barriers affect different commitment makers. So if you go to the next slide, please. Now, while there were barriers, there were opportunities that facilitated progress as well. And what's very interesting from our data is that while you can see that over 25 or a quarter of them reported barriers, a third of commitment goals were found to have opportunities that accelerated progress. And again, in a similar slide that we've looked at in the previous section, what we do see is that, in fact, governments do report that they've had opportunities to accelerate progress. So that is really helpful news given the context of the barriers that we have encountered in the data. If you go to the next slide, please. And again, looking at from the country's economic status, what you find is that low-income countries and lower middle-income countries did report that they had opportunities to accelerate progress. So there seems to be a balance here where there are barriers, particularly in low-income countries, but there have also been opportunities for those for that group to accelerate progress around achieving their commitment goals. Next slide, please. So what were the kind of opportunities? There were the primary that was reported was additional financial support, but the other very important opportunity or support was political support, as well as new partnerships. There were a few other opportunities that came up, but primarily those that had reported having been able to accelerate progress, it was linked to financial and political support and new partnerships. So this really highlights how important political and financial support is for successful achievement of the commitments. The next slide, please. Thank you. So as Carrie has mentioned, one of the areas that we did explore was to understand what are the type of equity considerations that have been accounted for in the Tokyo commitments. And what we find is that over half of the goals do have a dimension of equity. So the first thing we wanted to look at is, do people report on, do they have an equity dimension? And if they do, what kind of an equity dimension do they have? What you can see in this slide is that over almost 60% of the goals that were made by governments do have an element of equity. And similarly with civil society, academia, and multilaterals and donor organizations have a substantial proportion of goals that have an equity dimension. What you're seeing is that in the private sector group, you find only 15% of the goals have an equity dimension. Now, when we look at the type of dimensions that are being considered, what you see here is most of the goals considered age, life course stage or status, sex, or socioeconomic status, or all of the above. in terms of the type of equity dimensions. And what was very clear to us was that there is obviously only half of the goals are covering some form of equity dimension, but that they are actually looking at dimensions that are likely to be context appropriate. And we would really like to highlight the importance of embedding equity considerations, but making sure that they are context appropriate in order to achieve inclusive and sustainable progress. So I just want to sort of round the results section with the series of recommendations that Giacomo and I felt were very important to highlight. And to some extent, they are recommendations as well as conclusions. One, as you all noted with the results that Giacomo presented, it really helped to have smart and verified commitments. They are very hard. It's very intensive for commitment makers, for the community that supports commitment makers. But what the GNR data is telling us is that smart and verified commitments are supportive of collective accountability, and they allow us to assess where we are in a very, very accurate manner. The second key finding that I feel really highlights what Giacomo presented was that you do find that some goals require planning and accounting, whether it is for the time lags around the kind of outcomes that are being targeted by those goals, or whether they are in terms of trying to identify what are the data needs to measure the achievement of those goals accurately. So planning and accounting for the type of outcomes, for the time lags required, the resources required for achieving those outcomes is needed. But also identifying and investing in data needs is quite critical. And this is something that has been highlighted repeatedly in this community. So maybe I apologize if this is already a recommendation that has been up there, but I do feel it's important to highlight that this is a critical issue that comes up even in this progress assessment. We do find there are barriers as there are opportunities to accelerate progress. And I think it's really important to consider these barriers during the planning stages when the commitment crafting is going on, and identifying those mitigation approaches to address those shocks. What we also noticed with the opportunities was that in addition, we obviously had new partnerships, but we also highlighted the fact that political and financial support is so important for successful achievements of progress. And lastly, context-appropriate equity considerations should be promoted so we can support inclusive and sustainable progress that is relevant for the context that these commitments are focused on. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Carrie. Thank you, everyone, for listening to what is turning out to be a fairly long webinar. So we appreciate all your support in staying on. Carrie, over to you.
Sure. So now we're just going to go through and answer some of the questions. Some of us have tagged ourselves in the Q&A box to answer some of them. So let me go ahead and do a few, and then we will come back for more. So in terms of a schedule for N4G Paris reporting, our current plan is to begin to ask for progress reports for Paris commitments and for Tokyo commitments. There are still Tokyo commitments that are live and that are continuing. And so our plan is in calendar Q1 of 2026, we will begin asking for reports on those, hoping to have the reporting finished within Q2 and then do the analysis and release the report soon after. Just Thomas, in answer to your question, the difference between registered and reported goals. So registered goals or registered commitments are those which commitment makers have committed in the NAF system. And then reported means they have actually submitted a report. So that's that distinction. And then there are two people who have asked about the LMIC, HIC. We are not looking at headquarters of the commitment maker or where the operations are. We are looking at where the commitment maker sits. The commitment maker who made that commitment, where are they based? So if it's the South Sudan office, that has made the commitment, then the status for South Sudan, the World Bank economic status for South Sudan, is the status that would be used. So that's the distinction that's been made, where the commitment maker sits. Okay, I think I've answered the easy questions. And so now if I could, Thomas had a question about finding the details of the progress analysis for all the commitments that we were able to assess. So Giacomo is interested in answering that question. So if you could go ahead, Giacomo.
Yeah, so you will see online all the data is downloadable, so everyone has access to the all data set is in the NAF tracker. With the report, we have a few pages of methodology that will also explain how some of the insight that we're able to share were derived. So all the information is public available, and everyone can have access to it. I would like to add to this, and I'm picking another question in the chat, which was about whether we have done any specific analysis for financial commitment, and the answer is not yet. We would like to look into this, but also is a public good, the data set. So everyone really is welcome and is encouraged to use the data.
Great. And I think for the question from Chris Leather, congrats for the great work to date. Going forward, will it be possible for the NAF to track progress toward the achievement of national nutrition targets and the contribution of country-specific commitments toward the achievement of those national targets? I believe that Shibani is willing to answer.
Yeah, and Chris, thank you. Very important question. There are two different paths here that you raise. One is the global nutrition targets. And for tracking those, obviously, we have to pull together national data on those targets. So, for example, stunting, wasting, anemia, overweight, obesity, hypertension, diabetes. I think that's just in a nutshell across the set of global nutrition targets and the World Health Assembly targets. So that particular exercise is part of the GNR's country nutrition profiles. Given the summit for this year in France, the N4G summit, the priority on our end was to focus on commitment making and commitment progress tracking. So the country nutrition profiles is definitely on our radar for assessing the progress that the countries have made towards achieving the targets. But that is definitely a separate exercise. Now, the second part of your question, and I'm apologizing, I'm just scrolling down to the question that was answered, is about the contribution of these country-specific commitments towards achievement of those national targets. Now that, in essence, some of what we are doing right now is a way for us to get to that answer. But for individual level data, we're not presenting individual level data. There are 900 goals, as you can imagine. There is a NAF tracker online, and that will allow each stakeholder, whether it's the commitment maker themselves or interested parties, to understand how each of those countries, those commitment makers, have achieved the targets that they have set themselves. So to just answer your question, and I apologize, I went in a very long-winded way. There are two parts to what you have asked us. One is the country nutrition profiles, which is going to be a priority for the GNR. And the second one is the NAF tracker, and that should be live with individual level country data. Carrie, I hope that answered Chris's question. Back to you.
I think it did, and I think Chris will tell us if it didn't, for sure. So I think, Giacomo, there was one other question that I don't know if you had already answered from Johan about changes in the review process, and I'm sorry if you've already answered that. And then Shibani, if you would take Monica's question after, that would be great. Thank you.
I think there are a couple of questions about also the learning in terms of the process and whether we will change as we review the new N4G commitments. I do think there are learning in the process, but also there are insight and findings that really helps commitment makers to support them to a greater degree. So as we are kind of trying to go through the verification of the Paris N4G commitment, we will took some of those lessons learned, but some of the findings that this report trying to share are very much targeted to the community and making sure that we can increase the proportion of commitment goals that we are able to assess and to track.
Thanks, Giacomo.
Great.
Yeah, are you willing to do the one from Monica, Shivani?
Yes, of course. I think
you.
just to talk a little bit about where we are at, and just for the audience, the question which is in the Q&A is, looking ahead, how is GNR thinking about approaching the NAF to encourage and support increased commitment tracking and reporting from governments, especially tracking of commitments made under the N4G Paris commitments, Paris Summit? And I think and maybe you've answered Carrie Rabi's question around we don't have the Paris commitments yet. But just to repeat, I think what I'd like to say is we are in the process of still receiving commitments. The commitment registration website is open through June 30th, and I believe Sonia mentioned that earlier as well. So right now, commitments are still being accepted, and hence the commitments are not actually online yet. And I'll explain what the steps are. Once the commitments are received, they are basically assessed for smartness. And then there is a verification process in which we have to go back to the commitment maker to receive any additional information to verify and improve the smartness score. So what has happened right now is the GNR has started the process for the commitments that were received through the period of the summit, that is through the end of March. And then there will be a staggered process which will go through September of this year, when as commitments are verified and the smartness scores are finalized, they will be made available online. And so that's like the process in a way, Monica, that's also trying to answer your question on how we are going to handle already commitments that have been made. And I think as Brio has mentioned in his opening, there has been an unprecedented support in the summit this year, given the environment we are in, and we are seeing a significant number of commitments that have come in. So I think that the advocacy and the sort of mobilization of the community has already occurred. And that's not just because of GNR, it's because of a wider group of individuals and stakeholders, governments, and UN agencies that have been part of this process. I think, Carrie, we might be out of time to answer any more questions. Is that correct? You're on mute.
Do you mind closing us out? You're correct. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and I realize we are 1 minute over time. There are a lot of questions still in the Q&A, and maybe between Carrie, Giacomo, and myself, we might be able to pull some of those questions and respond to them. We will do our very best. This is a very big discussion that needs to really continue, and we really appreciate all the support and the interest in the NAF and the GNR. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for joining us today, as well as Brio and Sonia for framing the discussions around the importance of making commitments and the accountability, keeping the track of how these commitments are progressing. In closing, I think we've reflected quite a lot on the importance of accountability. And I want to highlight one really important thing is that we received only a response rate which was slightly less than half for the Tokyo commitments. So therefore, for progress tracking to be really successful, we will really need to mobilize as a community, not just to get commitment makers to make commitments, but to report on them and allow us to track them, so that this key piece of information will allow us to provide information for those groups that are trying to seek investments to support governments for some of the topics that we have discussed. We have come very far as a community from the first summit. When I look at the N4G data, I worked, as Carrie and Giacomo can attest, I worked with the N4G tracker data for several years, and I can tell you that while it might seem extremely onerous, the NAF allows us a lot of opportunity to assess commitments with a robustness and rigor that didn't exist for the N4G tracker. We did a fabulous job with that, but I think we are heading in a right direction. Now, of course, none of this would be possible without all of your support. So we really, really appreciate that the community stays engaged with the GNR. We also want to thank the United Kingdom's FCDO, Global Affairs Canada, Irish Aid, and BMZ for making their contributions to the GNR. We will have a report. This report really focuses on the results and findings we have presented today. This is a short summary report so that we keep it as concise as possible, so that you all can take these messages to your own policymakers and in the countries that you all work in. But for every individual country commitment or every individual commitment goal and commitment made, you will find information on that individual progress on the accountability tracker, the NAF accountability tracker. And lastly, I would like to say, if you haven't made commitments and or are working with teams that are planning to make a commitment to N4G Paris, please do that. It's really, really important for us to continue mobilizing support for nutrition. With that, I would like to thank all of you for joining us again. We look forward to future events for such kind of engagement. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day wherever you are, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Shivani.
Thank you.